Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. This is gonna get exciting. This is gonna get exciting. A lot of people say, Eli, why are you always so down on technology? You're supposed to be a technology professional. You're supposed to love everything. And here's the thing. I love cool technology that will actually, I think, be useful and be worth the time. Some technology just again, I am not that impressed with. So I kind of think it's funny right now. It's funny because everybody is like hyper focused on 5G. Everybody's like 5G, 5G, 5G. We need more 5G. And for me, I'm sitting here going, Again, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to snark on 5G. If you want to give me more speed with less latency, I'm not going to complain about that. On the other hand, I really just don't care that much. Again, a good 4G LTE, I think a larger rollout of that would be good. But the whole 5G thing, it comes when it comes. I don't care. I'm not looking for it on a smartphone anytime soon. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, look at how far behind Apple is. They don't have a 5G phone." And it's like, yeah, well, Verizon barely has a 5G network. So, what are you gonna do? I don't know, but everybody's like hyper focused on 5G, and I think it's really interesting because it's all 5G, 5G, 5G. And I've heard the use cases, and I've heard the arguments, and again, my opinions have been kind of like, yeah, because one of the problems with 5G is it solves problems, but I don't really think it solves the problems a lot of people are having. So the idea of having smart cars that can continuously be communicating with the internet and be able to basically upload terabytes of information a day. Is that a problem? Maybe, sort of. Most likely it's going to be a problem like 10 years from now. Again, not a big issue for somebody like me. Again, if you start talking about speed tests on smartphones, it's funny. I see like Ars Technica. I see all these people out there, and they're doing all these speed tests for 5G, and they're like, "Yeah, on 4G I got 300 megabits per second, and on 5G I got 600 megabits per second." And it's like, yeah, well, I'm watching like YouTube videos that require like 1.5 megabits per second, and listening to streaming music that probably requires something like 300 kilobits per second. So whether you have 300 megabits per second or 600 megabits per second, again, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. 600 is definitely better than 300. But practically, I just do not give a damn, right? So when I'm looking at internet and we're looking at the build outs and all that, one of the things that I'm looking at is more the idea of ubiquity for internet service. So again, if you're in major metropolitan areas, like at least in first world countries, we generally have good internet service here, but one of the questions is what happens when you go out to the hinterlands? And again, not even when we talk about things like hinterlands, I'm not even talking about like really on like a mountaintop somewhere, but just go to smaller towns, like towns of 10 or 20 or 30,000 people, and realize a lot of those places are damn near basically still using DSL connections. So one of the things that I'm interested in is basically internet service that can be provided to all of these places relatively easily. Because one of the things you have to think about with like 5G build outs is there's a massive build out for things like 5G. So whether you're doing fiber optic lines, new forms of copper lines, 5G lines, other types of wireless lines. There's lots of build outs. And when you do build outs, you run into a lot of bureaucratic problems, right? It's not just about the technology. Again, in the technology business world, most of your problems are not actually the technology, right? They will come out with technology. That technology will be solid. It'll be inexpensive. It'll do exactly what you need it to do. But it'll take a decade to roll out because of bureaucracy and rollout processes and hiring people and deploying stuff, right? You run into a lot of issues. And so that's one of the things going on right now with 5G is the technology works. The technology works. It will, in fact, give you a second head. If you're looking for a second head or a third nipple, it will give it to you. No. But anyways, 5G works, but there's a lot of problems with getting permitting to put up the towers for 5G, payments and actually get it installed, the whole nine yards. And so one of the things that I'm very interested in is this whole idea of low orbit satellite internet service. And when we talk about low orbit satellite internet service, basically we're talking about relatively small, by satellite standards, small satellites that essentially are in an orbit over the Earth at about half the distance of normal satellites. So one of the big problems with satellite internet service up until recently is something called latency. So the time it takes from your packet, from the data to get from your computer all the way up to the satellite, bounce back down from the satellite to wherever the transmitter or the receiver stations are, and to get on the internet, right? So that time there takes a lot of time. Now, things like satellite television service doesn't really matter a lot, because it's not real-time communication. Basically, you hit, you want HBO, and then it takes half a second, and then you're getting HBO. And even if the latency for your HBO is, a second or more, it doesn't matter. You're simply watching a TV show. The problem is you get to with internet is you have real-time communication services. You have a lot of these security services that things are timed. And so when you have massive latency, things get slow and they get bogged down. It becomes a real big problem. Again, we've had satellite internet service for a long time. The first time I used satellite internet service was at least 20 years ago. Commercial, like residential satellite internet service. We've had residential satellite internet service for 20 years. But the problem is the latency just sucks, right? You're like, yep. Basically, like if you want to download things, right? If all you want to do is torrent, all day long, it's fine. But as soon as you get into any kind of real-time communication, the latency is just absolutely miserable. So what's interesting about these low orbit satellites is that they are closer. Obviously, they're half the orbit of the normal satellites, and so the latency between your basically satellite modem and the satellite itself, and then bouncing back down to the base station, that is much shorter, and you actually start to get performance that works in the modern world. And so I think this can be a very, very, very interesting thing, and thinking about how you can then deploy massive amounts of internet service, basically globally, with relatively small bureaucratic hurdles. Because think about this, right? If you're gonna be deploying 5G, you're going to be deploying fiber, right? You've got to go to every community. You've got to go to every town. You've got to go to every county. You got to pay this person off and pay that person off, and pay this fee and pay that fee, and make sure, this county executive can buy a really fancy car this year. And then, oh no, if you need to use the same trenches that AT&T or another company is using, well, then you got to pay somebody else off to make it worth their while, right? But think about that. Every single town, every single city, every single county, every single state, every single country, every time you're going to be deploying any amount of internet infrastructure, it is just this massive hurdle. Now imagine how revolutionary it will be if all you have to do to deploy new internet service is simply launch new satellites. Boop, boop. Oops, we got 600 more satellites. Our internet service is dragging. We need to provision more resources. Okay, let's build and launch 600 more satellites. They go up in the air. They get spread out. Okay, we just over-provisioned the internet services for all of our users. Maybe every once in a while they have to go and they have to buy a new satellite modem to keep up with the new things. But basically that's it. If you want to deploy new internet services, the main company itself simply has to launch more satellites, and then the users may have to purchase modems. But that's relatively easily. You don't have to basically dig trenches. You don't have to build towers. You don't have to have people burning down the towers because somehow 5G created COVID. Right, I think it's a very fascinating thing. And so that's where I'm very excited, because SpaceX is launching their next set of satellites. So they're going to get their satellites up to 600, right? So SpaceX, if you did not know, they have a satellite internet service. They are deploying. So this is being deployed. Part of it has already been deployed. Starlink, it's called Starlink. And so it's going to have 600 satellites out there. Some internet users will get to test SpaceX's Starlink satellite broadband service soon, as the company prepares another launch in Florida on Thursday that would boost the number of its communications spacecraft in orbit to almost 600. A SpaceX SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket carrying about 60 of them is scheduled to lift off Thursday at 4:39. This is also one of the things that's very interesting with these small satellites, microsat type internet service design, is instead of having a few very large, very powerful satellites, they actually just launch a just gazillion of these smaller satellites. The good thing about this for things like internet service is if one satellite fails, it doesn't really matter, right? So the old systems, the old satellite internet systems, if a satellite failed or something happened with it, that may shut off all the customers. When you have literally thousands of satellites up in orbit, if one satellite fails, it's just Tuesday. It's like, oh no, a satellite failed. Whatever. Okay, just put one into a little bit different position. I think this is just a very, very interesting thing here. We can go over, we can take a look at the Starlink's website. They talk a little bit about this. And the curious thing, again, when we want to think about things like timelines, now do be careful about this. Do be careful about this timeline. Remember, it's an Elon Musk company. It's an Elon Musk company. I'm just saying, I'm not an Elon Musk hater. I am not an Elon Musk hater. I'm just saying he's a little optimistic. Optimistic is a word. Optimistic is a word. But Starlink is targeting service in the northern U.S. and Canada in 2020, rapidly expanding to near global coverage of the populated world by 2021, which I think could be very, very fascinating. They talk about this here, where basically the normal satellites are about 10,000 kilometers up, and they put their Starlink satellites up at about 550 kilometers. Again, this has to do with latency. So if you're on Earth, right, the longer it takes your signal to get up to the satellite and then bounce back again, that is going to be latency. This right here is latency. So obviously, if you're closer, then the latency is a lot less. You can go through here and you can take a little bit a look at what they're talking about. But I think this is an absolutely fascinating thing. And I think this is fascinating too from a topical standpoint, because one of the things you have to look at with how things evolve, how societies evolve, businesses evolve, and all that kind of stuff, is that many times things evolve based off of both technology and what is going on socially, right? So if you look at white flight, so if you look back at the 1960s and a lot of people moving out to the suburbs, right? White flight and the flight away from cities was not simply based off of the race riots and things like that. So people may look at cities, and cities had lots of problems. They had disease and they had crime, and then a lot of people were pissed off and they're burning the cities down. But that's only one thing that allows for change. The other thing is the technology that also allows for change. So during this time period, we have the interstate systems being built out. We have the suburban homes, ranchers. Again, you don't think about ranch style houses being some new technical innovation, but they were back in the day, right? Inexpensive, relatively easy to build houses. That was a technical innovation. So you had cars that were better. You had the interstate system that was better. You had the houses that were inexpensive. And then you had issues that were going on in the major cities. And so then basically you have these social issues, and then you have the technological revolution, so that people with means go, okay, well, this is really crappy, and I don't have to stay here anymore, so I'm going to go away, right? And so that's where you start to see like major evolutions in societies, is not just where there's the social change, but also where there's a technological change that goes along with it. So that's one of the things I think about now topically in this modern world. So we have COVID. We have COVID going on. We have racial issues going on again. We have rioting, and we have protests and all that kind of thing. And one of the things that I wonder about with Starlink is that basically the internet is the interstate service of the modern world, right? So back in the day, the important thing was you had to get the human person. You had to get the person from their house to their work. So that's where you have cars, you have the interstate system, that type of thing. Well, now, again, what is to work, right? So now the big thing is professionals who have valuable brains. Basically, they just need to be able to communicate with the people that they need to be able to communicate with. Again, if you're a coder, you don't necessarily have to show up to a building. You just have to be able to get your instructions from your boss. You have to type out your code, and then you have to upload your code to whatever repository, wherever it sits, right? That's what you have to do. And so one of the things to be thinking about is that a lot of people, whether they're lawyers, whether they're computer programmers, but a lot of people in this modern knowledge-based economy are stuck in major population centers because they need relatively decent internet service, right? And I think that's where you see a lot of people in these horrible suburbs now. Like the suburbs of the past weren't too bad, but now you get like a lot of horrible suburbs. And I think the reason you get so many horrible suburbs is because people don't really want to be in the cities, but they need to be close enough to the internet service and those other things. And so they kind of get stuck in these weird suburban hell places. But something to be thinking about, if we get something like Starlink, again, and when you get Starlink, think about this for a second. You get Starlink. If I can get 50 up, 50 down. I'm not even talking about 150 up, 150 down. I'm not talking about a gigabit up, down. If I can get 50 up, 50 down on a mountaintop in West Virginia, which means I can do my work, I can do my job, right? Think about that. I can do my job. I can get my entertainment. So one of the things to be thinking about, you know, if you go back 20 years ago, one of the reasons you would want to move to a major metropolitan area is because if you went to a small town, you would have to see the new movies in the very old movie theaters. And let me tell you, for any of the youngins out there, if you have not seen a brand new blockbuster in an old city movie theater, you just don't know what you're missing. I have seen things like Avengers on movie theaters that it is questionable whether those screens are bigger than the TV I have in my house. But think about this. If I have 50 up, 50 down in the middle of on a mountaintop, not only can I do my work, but I can also get the entertainment. Again, valuable things about being able to live in city areas, that you can actually know what's going on. You can listen to the music. You can watch the movies. You can do all that stuff. You can get that on the internet. And then with Amazon now, like Amazon or hate Amazon, but if you can then start ordering things off of Amazon, right? So if you want a big screen TV, right, you don't necessarily need a Best Buy somewhere near your house. You can just order it off of Amazon. Oh, you want free range organic oatmeal? Because again, like I eat specific food. There's foods that I like. My wife and I, we like to eat specific types of food. And that's the thing. Whole Foods and other grocery stores nowadays have that type of stuff around here. But, you know, if you go to the hinterlands, And no, anybody in the hinterlands, I love the hinterlands. Again, I want to move back to the hinterlands. I really do. But the problem is, like, you go to the hinterlands, and some of those grocery stores can be like, curious. What do you say about the grocery stores in the hinterlands, the IGAs in the hinterlands, right? You go to the hinterlands and, you know, you walk into the produce section, and, you know, you got the little, fruit flies and stuff flying on the fruit. Like literally picking up the potatoes and picking up the things in the produce section of the IGA in the middle of nowhere. And you're like you're in the grocery store, and you're like, I think that one's rotted. Oh, I think that one's rotted. Right? Again, you go to Whole Foods, and you're squeezing the stuff to see if it's ripe. You go to IGA in the hinterlands, you're squeezing it you're more tapping it to make sure it hasn't rotted yet, right? And so that's the thing. So if you like specific types of food, if you like decent coffee, right, you want something better than Folgers, you can go to Amazon or some of these other services right now, and you can actually just have that delivered to your house. Again, it might take you a little bit longer. But I think this is kind of a curious thing to be thinking about in this modern world of again, we saw all the social upheaval in the 60s, everything that happened with the 60s, things that are still occurring because of the 60s. And a lot of that was the social dynamics going on, but then it was the technology. Again, the interstates, the cars, the suburban housing, a lot of these things. And one of the things I find very curious now, looking at like Starlink and and there's going to be multiple satellite internet services, is to start thinking about, what happens when highly skilled people that are paid for their brain power can literally move damn near anywhere they want in the world? And they will still be able to do their work, and they'll still be able to get their entertainment, and they'll still be able to buy the products that they really care about. And I wonder what the social change will be. Because, I mean, again, like I spent a lot of my childhood in smaller towns and smaller cities in the United States. And to be honest with you, I like to go back. I'd like to go back. I don't want their current internet service. But that's the thing, right? It's all cost-benefit analysis. Because a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, everybody is moving to the cities because the cities are better. Well, the problem is for somebody like me, right? One, I need decent internet service. I just have to have decent internet service. And two, grocery stores. All right, decent grocery store, right? But if you can get the Starlink, think about how that changes the dynamic. And then I do also wonder for the small cities, can they start bringing people back? Like, hey, come back to the types of towns that many of you folks grew up in, and you had to leave for the opportunity. For the culture, you had to leave. For the opportunity, you had to leave. For the product, simply being able to buy a product relatively easily, you had to leave. Well, now all of that stuff, we can provide you all of that stuff, and we can provide you neighborhoods where you know all your neighbors. And we can provide you housing where you're going to pay a fraction of the cost of what it would cost you in one of these major metropolitan cities. You will get a much, much, much nicer house and be in a much nicer environment overall. So I am very, very excited about this. Again, 5G, I don't care. Like 5G I feel is like the old paradigm. Again, that's one thing you have to think about, like with inertia and old paradigms, and how many times people design for what they thought the future was going to be. See, I feel like 5G is what people were designing for, and Starlink is where people are going to go. Do people really want and need their cars uploading in real time terabytes of information every day? Like, when you think about that, is that really revolutionary, world changing? Nah, right? On the other hand, if you can get 50 up, 50 down, or more, literally on a mountaintop in the middle of West Virginia, or in the middle of Wyoming, or these other places, how revolutionary is that? And I would argue that is much more exciting and revolutionary. So anyways, if you haven't taken a look at Starlink and these other low orbit satellite services, you really should take a look at it. Again, if you're in the technical field, if you're doing consulting work, if you're in the business world, you should really be looking at this, because I think it's just a massive, it's basically, this is going to be the internet or the interstate service for the modern world, right? There was a point when countries figured out how to make roads, right? And so they made roads around the cities and all that kind of stuff. But if you went out to the hinterlands, they were still on dirt roads. But then there was a point, you start running interstates across the country, and then you can start improving so many things. Again, so you can have factories in multiple different cities all being able to provide supplies to each other. Again, you can have a factory in the middle of the country. And again, if you're in the middle of the country, if you're around Denver, anywhere in the country is about 1,500 miles away. So if you're in Denver, if you have a factory in Denver, you can literally get your product to anywhere else in the country within 2 days. And that's one of the things that makes something like the interstate system is so powerful. So then you start thinking about, like, with an internet service, where it's ubiquitous. If you're in the middle of Wyoming, if you're in the middle of Montana, if you're on the mountaintop of West Virginia, how that starts to change the dynamic and a lot of interesting things. So I'm very curious, very excited about this, Don't care about 5G, but Starlink. So if you haven't taken a look at Starlink, definitely take a look at Starlink. If you haven't taken a look at EliTheComputerGuy.com, remember, almost every day, new Eli the Computer Guy videos are going up. Pi-hole is a video that just went up on EliTheComputerGuy.com today. So basically, if you want a DNS security service for your local area network, learn about the Pi-hole. And anyways, with that, I will see you folks later. If you have any questions about the technology and the business world, put them in the doobly-doo down below. I may or may not answer them. As far as the people that liked the live show versus these pre-recorded shows, I don't know. Gotta be honest with you. This is a hell of a lot less stressful. Doing pre-recorded shows is a hell of a lot less stressful, because I can really think about what I want to say. I can go out and I can take a run and I can get some fresh air and I can calm down a little bit. Don't go so spastic. So that's the thing, when you do the live shows, when you ask me a question during the live shows, I tell you exactly what the hell I think. I don't know. That might not be the best thing. It might be entertaining, but all the way around might not be the best thing. But so anyways, with that, I'll see you folks later.